Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness, your home for gains and brains. And we need to have a very tough conversation. I'm trying to give you a warning now so that you don't have to figure it out yourself the hard way later on. Be sure to check out the Body Composition Bible. This goes over all kinds of details about nutrition, not just another calorie and macro calculator. And be sure to check out the programs on my site as well, not only exercises on a sheet. I break down everything you need to make serious gym progress in the long term, but I think anybody who has done a major cut has experienced this. You get to that point where you've been cutting for a while, and you look in the mirror and it's like, I did not anticipate being here. You thought you were going to be farther along, and then it hits you, oh man, I need to do this for longer. And you may already be in a heck of a battle at that point. So let's start with some examples of me. These are roughly 8 years apart. And it may not look like it, but I am almost the same weight in these pictures. Around 152 to 155 pounds. But on the basic level, the lower body fat that you get, the smaller that you're going to look walking around day to day. But the better you're going to look in photos. So there is that inverse relationship that throws a lot of lifters off. And to make matters worse, because a lot of guys don't even have the ab muscles that they anticipated once they cut. And then you're like, well, this doesn't look good at all. And then people oftentimes go into a serious dirty bulk. I call it the desperation dirty bulk, to overcompensate for that. And that's how a lot of people end up yo-yo dieting all the time. They drop a lot of weight, don't like how they look, regain a bunch of weight, think it's going to be a bunch of muscle mass. Of course it's not. And then they just go back and forth in perpetuity. The purpose of this video is not to scare you into cutting. That said, you need to realize that if you do have that goal, you want to get shredded and have the six-pack, have the aesthetics, get that lean Greek god physique that is always so popular. Most of you are probably much farther away from that than you think. We're going to further analyze my physique in a moment, but the amount of simply scale weight you have to drop to get to sub 10% body fat, it becomes very apparent, and a lot of guys, they're going to tap out of the cut before they even get to that point. I put this on my Instagram story. This was a number of weeks ago at this point. The first one in the white tank top, I was a few weeks out of my show at the end of May, and then the one in the black tank top, that was a number of weeks after my show. And I said, guess the weight difference. 10 to 15 pounds got a lot of votes. Most people voted 16 to 21 pounds, 22 to 27 also got a good amount of responses. Then at the very bottom, 28 plus pounds only got 9% of the vote. And wouldn't you know, the option that got voted the least by far was correct. The weight difference in these two pictures was 30 pounds. 155 up to 185. This is what I'm talking about with the scale difference. I obviously gained some body fat in the photo on the right. Now that said, you can still see lines in my legs, I still have noticeably capped shoulders, I still have visible abs at this point. You can't see them in this photo, but they're apparent even still as I'm into this bulk, and my face is obviously much fuller on the right. I didn't realize this until after the show watching some videos that I was recording leading up to it, but my face got so gaunt, it's almost hard to look at that now. But again, that is simply the price you have to pay to get genuinely ripped. Not just lean, ripped. There is a big difference between the two, and that is something that we need to cover as well. Because you often hear the terms ripped and lean and shredded and peeled. They get used kind of interchangeably, depending on the circumstance. In bodybuilding, it's called conditioning, but I want to draw a distinction between these terms and map them out more so, because I think it's important for the overall context. So, you see body fat charts a lot, and the main issue with these body fat charts is that it's almost always different people, and it's going to be different lighting, different angles of pictures, so you can get general estimates based on these things, but I think the best way overall would be using the same person in the same exact spot, in the same lighting, but also keep in mind the body fat is going to look different on different people. The more muscular you are, you're going to look leaner at higher body fats. You could have different muscle fiber distribution, you could have different limb lengths, you can have more visible abs just from the onset. Some people get lucky that way. Some people have 6 packs, some people genetically only have 4 packs. So even if 2 people get to the same rough percentage of body fat, one may look leaner because of that. There's a lot of confounding factors when it comes to this. But here is my overall breakdown. I consider lean in the low teens body fat. So that's going to be anywhere from, say, 12% down to 10 or so. That's going to be typically like, okay, looking good for the beach. Maybe you're going to a rave or something, or a vacation. It's something that you can cut down to, and it should not be terribly hard. You could even maintain it long term if you really wanted to, but I think every man should be able to get to the lean state if they want to. But I've talked to a lot of guys over the years, and I still talk to them. They struggle greatly to get below even 15% body fat. And there's a lot of factors that go into it beyond simply, oh, just calories, because some people can cut and cut and cut, and they're in this steep deficit, and their body fat still doesn't seem to go anywhere. Get the Body Composition Bible, I break all the variables down there. Far too many to go over in this video. I think not only do a lot of guys want to be there, but I think it's something that once you have your training and diet really dialed in, you should be able to do. Now, this body fat percentage is not going to win you any major bodybuilding shows, but this is the fitness industry, and we all have crippling body dysmorphia, so not good enough. That goes into the next tier. You could say 8% to 10% body fat. I would call that ripped. So this is where I would classify myself going into my show. Now, I put up this short whenever I was a few days out, and I had this in-body scan. It said I was 3% body fat, and that's just not correct. I appreciate the machine trying to gas up my head, and I will say whenever I first got the result, I was feeling pretty good, but even then I did not believe it. I mean, 3%, I don't know if there's anybody on the Olympia stage that is a legit 3% body fat. But 8% to 10%, once you have a good muscular base built, that's going to be the point where you have, like, visible lines in most places of the body. And for most guys, you get to this point, that's when the side effects of cutting, if you've made it this far, are going to become very pronounced. The sex drive is going to tank, your energy is going to be in a hole, workouts are going to be suffering, you're going to be fighting hunger constantly. You get to that sub 10% point, 8 to 9, and we'll talk about incorrect body fat measurements in a moment, because a lot of guys have those wrong too. But you get to that point, you're going to be on the struggle bus. Then going even lower than that is what I consider shredded. This would be 6 to 8% body fat. And realistically, aside from bodybuilders, I don't think anybody's going to get to this point. And that goes into the final category. I would call this peeled. You see that term a lot. I would say peeled is sub 6%. And you see some guys talk about, oh man, I was 3% body fat on stage, or this guy was whatever insanely low number. Ronnie Coleman famously broke the chart. He was like negative body fat. You hear all this lore from guys, especially old heads, that believe this stuff. So realistically, for the average guy's goals, getting to the lean part of this scale is going to be plenty. And as you build more muscle over time, you could even look lean at mid-teens body fats, even perhaps into higher teens body fats. The problem is, when you consume a lot of fitness content, you're going to always see shredded models and bodybuilders and other people like that, so the reference points that you have are skewed, and a lot of guys will realize that even if they want to reach the ripped end of this scale, even if they get close, a lot of the times they'll realize that was just not worth the price I paid. Whether you are 20% body fat or 5% body fat, muscle is the key to making it look good. So on the screen now, you can see some examples I found just doing random searches of incorrect body fat estimations. So there's a subset of people that are going to overestimate their body fat because their body dysmorphia is at that level. But what a lot of guys do if they're not in that mindset, they're going to say that they are probably 3 to 5% body fat less than they actually are. I very commonly see it around the 5% range. So you'll see a dude that has some semblance of abs and he's, say, 15% realistically, and guys online will say that he's 10%. Or even a guy that is, say, 9 to 10% body fat, if he flexes hard and gets under that perfect downlighting, it can really change the appearance to make it look, based on first visual, it's like, oh man, you're 5 or 6%, bro, you're freaking peeled. A lot of comments on the short I posted prior to the show, a lot of guys were saying, oh man, I think you're like 6 or 7% body fat, bro. I thought I might have been there briefly, but upon further inspection, I realized that I was not. So I was pretty vascular overall leading into the show, especially if I had just trained, the veins are going to be more pronounced, but I could still pinch a bit of fat on my stomach. So if you're going to get truly shredded, you're going to be able to pinch a very thin layer. Mine was, I don't know what exactly to call it, but it was more than thin. There was not like a huge noticeable split from the upper to the lower pec, and in a lot of pictures as well, it looked relatively smooth. There was not that shrink wrap look. You hear that said in bodybuilding a lot. So that's something to consider too. Then going down to the abs, my abs were pretty well defined, I would say, but that lower part of them, you could call that the main struggle area for most people when it comes to belly fat. I had a pretty hard time getting that to go away. That is something, again, it just takes chipping away so much more to lose incrementally little bits more of body fat for that crazy look to really happen. And I did not fully get there. And then even going down to the glutes, because in bodybuilding, people completely obsess over glute striations, bro. It's just always said, it's like that is the true marker, the pinnacle of leanness. I could see, I thought a bit of them if I was under the right lighting and flexing the right way, but overall, I did not have serious striations in my glutes either. To get to that point, I probably would have to lose an extra 2 to 3% body fat, and the thought of that right now even is just harrowing. I could just put it like this: if you have genuinely been below 10% body fat, you will know, because you have felt it. The side effects are undeniable. They're going to be apparent at that point. Just getting relatively beach lean, it is not the same thing. It is two totally different animals. Getting to those points, even if the body fat percentage difference is only, say, 3 to 4, it is that significant in terms of the cost of getting there. So we've talked a lot about fat, but there's two other variables to consider too. The first one being water retention. And if you are somebody that is always eating higher carb, which is standard advice both in the fitness industry and outside of it, in terms of each gram of carbohydrate, that is going to take about 3 grams of water in terms of storing it on your body when it becomes glycogen. So the more carbs that you eat, the more water you're going to hold by default, and also the more sodium that you consume, the more water you're going to add on top of that as well. So this is why a lot of the time you'll see guys on their bulks, they get that moon face effect. This is one of the reasons why guys are led to believe that they're packing on size during a bulk. Even if their gym progress is going up, they're going to think they're going to put on more muscle than is just feasible in that time frame. They're going to balloon up with water. Also consider taking creatine. That also is going to drive water into the muscles too. So you have all these factors, your water weight's going to go up and up and up. And guys think that it's muscle mass because you fill out the shirts more, and then whenever you cut down, this becomes very apparent. So when I started my most recent cut, I was about 200 pounds. And I had been eating how I just described. And it was only a matter of, I think, a couple weeks or so, I dropped almost 10 full pounds. And the amount of body fat loss that's going to happen in that time frame is not going to be substantial. But if you go on simply what the scale says and you're thinking only in terms of fat being lost, you'd be led to believe that. What really was happening was that I was shedding a lot of water weight, because I went from a very high carb diet down to, I think I was under 50 grams of carbs a day, right out of the gate, whenever I was cutting. So that difference alone produced big changes on the scale that did not line up with actual fat loss. If you want to get a true gauge of your body composition without the water weight variable, you could do that for even a brief period of time, say even a week or two, just to kind of see where your weight stabilizes at and how you look without holding the extra water weight. But that water variable, especially if you change your diet up frequently, eat different things, and also depending on how you react to certain foods as well, that water weight aspect can fluctuate pretty heavily, and that's one of the reasons a lot of people who obsess over the scale, they freak out in the short term because there's a basic water fluctuation, and they automatically link it to, oh, I gained fat, or I've totally stalled on the fat loss. And that might not be the case. And that brings us to the final aspect here, muscle mass. So I put out a recent video, how to keep the most muscle mass when cutting, and especially the more and more that you cut, the more important that becomes. That said, I do think the notion of losing muscle mass on a cut has been pretty overblown. The main reason being, if you are eating sufficient protein, the chances of your body breaking down those proteins, which is what muscles are almost exclusively made out of, it is very, very low. Only in scenarios where you could classify them as an emergency from the perspective of the body, very, very low body fat, perhaps that could start happening, but the average person is never going to have their body fat get that low. Ergo, you using up muscle mass on a cut, that's really never going to happen. So a lot of the time whenever guys will lose strength on the cut, and I talk about this a lot because guys try to argue with me, oh no bro, muscle mass is just the only thing that matters, fat is irrelevant. Body fat assists muscle mass in lifting. By giving you better leverages, you're going to have more overall energy, and the body fat can serve as a cushion for the joints and the tendons and the muscles to operate with and sort of bounce off of. And that can make a major difference. I mean, especially in things like the bench press. I speak from painful experience here. If I lose even a few pounds, my bench press will typically plateau pretty much immediately, and it may even go down a bit. And on the flip side, if I've been stuck at a bench press plateau, and I suddenly get a jump on the scale, I'm probably going to break it pretty soon. That's how it goes. And that's going to vary per exercise per person, but overall, that is the consistent trend. More powerlifters, at least the guys, are closer to 20% body fat than 10. I mean, some you could argue are closer to 30%. So whenever you see your gym performance going down during a cut, it's not because you're losing muscle really. You don't have those leverage boosts that increased fat as well as water weight are going to give you. But that's exactly why cutting can be so painful. Because you lose all that fat over whatever length of time that you do. Like I said, it's probably going to take longer for some of you than you realize it is. And you're like, oh my god, I think I lost muscle mass. You probably didn't. You probably just didn't have as much muscle as you thought to begin with. But you have to account for all of these things when it comes to body composition, especially whenever you're trying to get lean. Because having unrealistic standards and expectations for how big you're going to be once you cut down, how fast you can cut down, and they starve themselves, do a ton of cardio, you're not going to win that battle for long. Your hunger is going to beat you, oftentimes pretty quickly. And some people in general, their nutrition is so out of whack that they struggle to drop just basic percents of body fat down. So there's a lot to consider here. If you guys want to get in direct contact with me, the best way to do so is on Patreon, one-on-one conversation there, and you get lifetime access to our Discord server. But this has been it for me, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Shout out to the Patreon supporters and all of those in the Discord and who engage regularly on this channel. Be sure to get the Body Composition Bible and your program down below. Make this as streamlined as possible. Stop wasting your time. I'll lay it all out for you there. And use my links down below to save money on some great products and services as well. And I will catch you guys next time.